Hello and welcome, I'm JD and today I want to talk about what's coming next for Nebulous Fleet Command. The game released into early access on the 12th of February 2022, just a little over 3 months ago, and even before that, the development team has had a clear vision of what they want to include within the full release of the game and potentially even afterwards. So today I'm going to go through the major updates that the development team has listed in their public roadmap. I'm going to combine that with some of the more detailed information from the public Discord server in which the development team has interacted and discussed what they want to do with the community. At this point in time, the development team want to include at least 6 major updates, and apart from the first 2, these are in no particular order. We currently know that the modular missiles update, which is the first major update being implemented into the game, is being worked on and is in development, and we should get some more information about that one soon. Additionally, the ships of the second faction are in progress and are being worked on concurrently through the modular missiles and other updates. The ships for the second faction are considered a major update and will be implemented when ready. Other than that, there is the Conquest mode, carriers and fighters, a story mode, marines and boarding, and environmental hazards that the team want to implement. Now this is in no doubt to a number of other small minor enhancements and quality of life additions that they consistently make, and we've seen that in terms of additional game modes, additional maps, as well as the ability to flip a map to really take advantage of the full 3D battle space which we can fight in. And we've seen some of these to date in the 11 updates since going into early access. So let's go through these 6 major updates and the ships of the second faction in a little bit more detail. Before we do, I think it's important to manage expectations as all the developers have full-time jobs and they do this in addition to that, which is really impressive considering the pace of some of the updates, the patches, and their ability to continually communicate within the public Discord. I've used 3 markers to help us do this. One being a light bulb is either an unconfirmed idea that I've been able to pull from the Discord but I haven't been able to confirm, or it's an idea that a community member or myself would like to see or think would be great to see. If it has the Discord icon, then a developer has said that's an idea or an intent that they would like to implement. Noting I use the words idea and intent as things will change as the team works to actually develop these from concepts into mechanics, art and models. And things change over time when you actually start to get into the detail. So anything you see in this video may change at a later date if you're viewing later on. Finally, if it's got a green tick, it has been confirmed, and if it has, I'll put the source as to where I've got it so you can read from the same page. So first, let's have a look at modular missiles. The developer released a concept document for this on the 6th of February this year, in which they outlined what they want to achieve in the first major update. There are currently 4 offensive missiles within the game, 1 point defense missile and 1 torpedo, and this requires players to play to set builds and set types in order to maximize the effectiveness of these missiles. So the aim of this update is to increase the depth of missile gameplay, which the developer states that missile hits should be devastating. Even taking a single hit should be something players fear. That means players shouldn't have to build dedicated missile fleets, nor carry missiles in large quantities in order to overwhelm enemy defenses and guarantee a hit. By having the ability to customize missiles, players will be able to penetrate defenses and score hits on enemy ships through situational gameplay. Missiles will be customized in a dedicated editor like we currently do with the fleet editor. We'll be able to select from a number of different components, mixing and matching in order to build something that fits our gameplay style, our fleets, and how we want to play. And we'll do that by mixing and matching various different components. Each missile should have an engine, a warhead, a computer, and a seeker, and then have the option to have support modules. The concept document talks about how we'll have sub-options for each of these, so being able to increase the effectiveness or lethality of a warhead at the expense of, for example, speed, or by increasing speed and then mixing it with additional seeker types in order to bypass things such as chaff or active decoys, and therefore make sure that we're a little bit more accurate, all with the trade-off of being more expensive than you would currently have the current missiles in the game. Would also have the ability to have hot or cold launch options. So things such as the riposte are currently a hot launch, whereas most of the missiles and the torpedoes in the game are currently cold launch from the VLS and the MLS systems, in which they then are ejected into space, have to orientate, and then engage their engines for launching at the target. In addition to all this, we'll have the ability to have more improved point defenses. So currently we have 3 point defense options within the game, all at the class 1 size. will then be able to have improved point defense up to Class 2, including at least a barrier flak system, which will target entire missile raid groups instead of individual targets, by establishing a continuous barrier of time-fused explosives, and will also be introduced to active decoys, which players can control and send away from their ships to confuse and disorientate missiles, as opposed to currently we only have chaff, which has to allow the missiles to get close. So this all comes from the concept document that the development team has released to us. We have been told in the last game update by the developers that they are about 50% of the way through the developmental tasks, and that a devlog will be released soon, in which hopefully we'll be able to see how the progress is going and some of the cool things that this update will provide. So if you want to pay attention to that devlog, if you subscribe to Ariandis Industries, you'll get pushed that notification when it is released. And I also plan to do a more detailed breakdown of the modular missiles concept document in the future, so stay tuned for that one. Next, we have the second faction ships. So we've been told this is in concurrent development, and we've been told that by the developer and the development team themselves. So within the Nebulous Fleet Command lore, there are two factions. There is the Alliance, which is the current faction and the main ruling faction within the lore, and then we have the Outlying Systems Protectorate, or the OSP, which is a breakaway faction from the Alliance, and that is the ships that the second faction will be modelled around. This won't be a simple reskin. We'll have completely new hull designs in terms of how they look, where their modules can be placed, and then how they also operate. However, their ships will still fit within the same class structure that the development team has introduced. However, they may not be, and probably won't be, a comparable trade-off. So you probably won't see a frontal spinal mount on a destroyer. It'll likely be something different. We do know that the design style will be that of a retrofitted civilian ships, as the Outlying System Protectorate is a breakaway from the Alliance, and the lore document talks about how they had to rapidly refit civilian vessels for the war. So it makes sense to me that we would build a fleet around one faction. So upon entering the fleet editor, for example, you would select which faction you want to build your fleet around, and then from there you'd add your hulls like we currently do, and then selecting your modules and components in order to build out that fleet. One thing that we may get is faction-specific weapons. So all the flavor and lore text on the current equipment and modules all talks about Alliance-specific weapons and where they came from and how they got them. So with a breakaway faction, may also use some modified Alliance equipment, or they may have completely their own equipment that they've designed and built around that retrofitted civilian sort of style. This could be a completely new set of weapons, or it could be a partial rework of current weapons to either have better or worse statistics, depending on how the development team goes. Obviously, they'll balance it against the current set of ships, so it should be fairly balanced, but it'd be interesting to see what else could we get and how the second faction could change up players' playstyles and ship builds. So for everyone who loves single-player games, the Conquest mode will be for you. It'll be centered around a procedurally generated solar system, so hopefully we'll have the ability to determine how large or small we want, although we don't yet know how the map type will be laid out or how players will move around that map. Will it be something along the hyperlanes of Stellaris, as the lore document does talk about hypergates, or will it be more of something around a hexagonal system where players will occupy one hex with one fleet, and because of the nature of the gameplay, will we be able to then have multiple fleets on different hexes, all attacking or defending into one. So the Conquest mode will be focused around an attacking and a defending faction. We haven't been told who is attacking or defending. We may get the option in order to play both attacking and defending from each faction's standpoint. We may have the option to pick if we want to attack or defend as a certain faction, opening up different replayability options, particularly with that of a procedural solar system, allowing us to fight through different solar systems and playing as the different factions in various modes. We do know that at the beginning you'll deploy your fleets ready and poised to either defend or attack certain locations. And I think it would be really interesting to be able to start by building a fleets from a points limit. So for example, this could act as the difficulty mode. You only have 5,000 points to build a starting fleet, and then you have to build your ships from there. Well, then it's going to be significantly harder than if you say had 15,000 points and you could build multiple fleets up to the current 10 hull limit per fleet. We know that players will be able to operate on a strategic level in which the map of the solar system will provide. However, battles will be fought in the existing skirmish mode with the maps already released to date or released in the future, as well as the various different game modes. One of the things to be worked on is how those maps and those game modes are selected, and I'm sure the developers have an idea for that. We know that ships can be constructed, however it will be slow. You won't be able to throw away your ships carelessly in battle, as they will become something that you will grow attached to and you don't want to lose. I read that as don't expect to see 10 battleships on one side. Battleships, for example, will be that rarity, and those flagships that you will take, you want to use with other supporting ships in order to achieve your missions. So this leads nicely into continuity. Fleets, in particular, ships will have to exist between battles as they cannot be easily replaced. Also that in between battles and in between supply or logistical nodes, the ammo and the missiles that are currently on a ship will matter. So players will be less inclined to simply dump all their missiles at the enemy in order to destroy their ships, unless they have the ability to resupply either by returning back to a logistical point or with a logistical ship. So you really want to be able to keep those missiles when you actually know they're going to provide an impact, and likewise using that ammo, having it stocked enough on the ships in order to degrade the enemy armor, damage their components, remove their point defense, and then engage with your missiles. I think this type of approach makes it so that you want to be strategic in your use of everything, not only on the strategic map, but also in the skirmish maps as well. Whilst it would be a single player mode, the ability to play with a friend either with or against is always fun. So there is discussion around having the ability to play with either one or more people. What that number is, I don't know. Having the ability to play with friends is always exciting, especially with the ability to deploy into the same battles or transfer command authority to another player if it's only your fleet engaging with enemy fleets. And this helps with micro, makes it more exciting, and just offers a different way to play the game. So civilian traffic is something that the developers want to include, particularly in the beginning of the Conquest mode, where civilian traffic is still within the battle space before retreating back to safe locations. Civilian traffic will add to additional tracks within the skirmish mode. The players will need to have sufficient intelligence to decode that certain tracks are civilian or confirm through visual means. At this point, it's unknown what the repercussions for firing or destroying civilian traffic would be, but I'm sure there'd be something there. Finally, logistic ships. We've talked about continuity for ammo and missiles. The implementation of logistic ships either as something you have to defend and include in your various fleets, or as something that only exists on a strategic layer will be important in order to keep your ships supplied with ammunition and missiles in order to maintain the momentum within the Conquest mode. I think that will add something quite interesting instead of simply being able to steamroll the enemy after a few battles, is that you'll have to have the ammo and the missiles and provide that consideration both within the strategic level and your battles in order to continue that momentum. Everyone loves carriers and fighters. They're in most games that have anything to do or show any sort of semblance of naval or space combat. I think they're cool, and I can't wait till they're implemented. We do know that the developers have said that all their fighters will be operated by pilots and not by drones, but more importantly, they will be configurable. One thing the developer has said is that the customization here won't be as intense as the other options, but we'll still have the ability to configure how they operate. So this may be done by adding another design element within the fleet editor that allows us to configure fighters like we can missiles, or something that we may be able to do and preset during the game, or that we may be able to change fighter loadouts in between sorties during a mission. One thing that the game currently doesn't let you do, and this is by design, is target certain subsystems. So within like Star Wars Empire at War, you were able to target shields or weapons or engines. In Nebulous Fleet Command, you simply target the ship, and the attacking ship determines whereabouts on that enemy ship that they target based on randomization, attacking along the length of the hull and various other points. And the reason for this is that they're saving the ability to target categories of subsystems for the fighter update. So this will allow us to do things such as target point defense or target engines. It may be more broader than that, such as target point defense, target offensive weapons, or target propulsion, for example, and in which case the engines and the maneuvering thrusters are degraded, with the fighters taking the opportunity to attack whatever they can see, and potentially things such as target sensors, such as radar panels, blanket jammers, or fire control logs. I think the ability to not go too deep on this would be great, so that the fighters take targets of opportunity as opposed to simply loitering around the engines trying to attack that. They will also no doubt have to overcome point defense, so the point defense would either be expanded upon what it currently is, or we'd have fighter specific point defense. Personally, I think it would be good to see the point defense that would be implemented in the game simply take on a dual role, so that we don't have to take a detailed point defense for every type of situation. I don't need to take point defense for missiles, I don't need to take point defense for fighters, etc. I just equip point defense based on the resources that I have, and that it defends my ship from most threats. However, fighters being able to strip point defense off for something such as a battleship will obviously make it more susceptible to missiles later on, and that's where the developers can combine fighter gameplay with missile gameplay. If we have fighters, we have to have carriers, and we get at least one carrier hull per faction. This would be a dedicated fighter transport. Whether we get a heavy carrier and maybe a light carrier, I think we'd just get one carrier per faction, and I think that is more than enough, as it would add a new ship class to the game, and therefore we would have one hull per class. And that also cuts down on development time, as the development team don't have to model and implement multiple hulls in addition to new game mechanics. One thing I've seen in the community is the idea of a hangar module. So being a class 5 mount, one of the largest mounts in the game, and that's what the beam turret in the background is mounted in. If we were able to have a class 5 mount which contained a number of fighters, then you could equip that onto a heavy cruiser, and therefore have a bit of a small mobile fighter wing which could go out with a heavy cruiser, like you see on modern day naval ships, where they're able to deploy small amounts of helicopters or fighters, and then just have that little bit of protection and a little bit more in our fleet building options. This could also be an interesting way for the carrier hull to be implemented, in which the hull has a number of spots which can be mounted with multiple hangar modules to increase the amount of fighters on the ship, as well as then having the ability to add additional components that provide buffs to it. There's the ability to refit either by refueling or by rearming at a quicker speed, so to turn around the sortie time, or to increase the length of time on station, or the ability to then swap between loadouts. However the development team wants to go down the fighter route, that would be interesting too. So I think the carrier and fighter update will certainly be something very interesting, both for multiplayer and for Conquest mode. The story mode, I'm a little bit light on details. We do know, again, it will be persistent, with the basis being a task force engaging across a secessionist system, so more likely playing from the Alliance standpoint, fighting through a number of missions against the OSP, whether we fight through a very linear campaign or gives the player options along the way, either forking off and coming back to a main branch, or giving different options that if you make a decision one system, then you don't play down a certain set of missions for later on. That's to be seen, but we do know that it would be lore driven. And so that will really introduce us to the lore that the Nebulous Fleet Command team has put a lot of work into. And again, we know that civilian ships and logistics ships will have a bit of an impact here. In all sci-fi settings, there are Marines that are on board with the fleet crew. Nebulous Fleet Command is no different. The developers has signaled their intention to have Marines and the ability to board ships. This will either be done through boarding pods or boarding ships. Boarding pods may be a separate game object or element, or we may see this tied in with the fighters and carriers update, where fighters can be configured into transport ships to take Marines from one ship over to an enemy ship. So if we can board enemy ships, then there has to be a way for us to repel boarders. Whether all hulls have the ability to have a organic marine detachment, whether that be more numerous on the larger hulls such as a battleship, or whether it is a little bit smaller or completely devoid of for things such as corvettes, which don't have a lot of room, remains to be seen, but I think that could be an interesting way to go. So by having Marines to be able to capture or destroy enemy ships, like we spoke about within the fighters, it would make sense that point defense will need to be taken down. So maybe launching Marines and a boarding party at the beginning of the battle is probably not going to be as efficient as maybe towards the mid to late game, where a bit of the point defense is destroyed, the ship has taken a little bit of damage, and that gives you the opportunity to get through point defense so that you can get that boarding party safely onto the ship, and that way they can make their way to important systems such as the CIC, propulsion, or to take out the power after a period of time, capture that ship, in which case maybe you can then operate at a limited or reduced capacity, as your boarding party may not be as efficient as your actual fleet personnel who are trained for it. This could introduce new gameplay modes such as capture or board the station gameplay. So we already have stations within the game. If we were able to land various boarding parties onto the station as opposed to simply using our ships to capture various points, then we would be able to have various teams of Marines fighting to take control of that station, with ships continually adding reinforcements, therefore being able to capture or then take over the station at various times. And then, like always, we should be able the ability to have marine specific modules that provide buffs or other increased functionality when designing our fleets, such as a barracks, which will maybe act like berthing, providing more spots for Marines, as opposed to what is organically provided within the hull or by the base of the ship, and maybe something like an armory, which provides either better offensive or defensive capabilities to those Marines, so that you can have a more elite force, as opposed to something that is just a generic trying to overwhelm the other team with numbers, as opposed to quality. Finally, we have environmental hazards. The team has talked about things such as electrical storms, electromagnetic interference, and moving asteroids and terrain, and more. We don't know what the and more is, but potentially can see how it would play out in games such as like Stellaris, where systems have various modifiers that either degrade or enhance ships. So in Nebulous Fleet Command, this could be things such as increasing or decreasing the speed of ships, either enhancing radar, or by blocking radar, requiring ships to get a lot closer than they currently do in order to see and conduct a fight, maybe due to the amount of debris within the location that are just blocking or jamming the radar, or maybe it's the star or something like that. And likewise with energy weapons and basically anything else that is within the game, we may be able to have an environmental hazard that either adds or removes certain effects. And I think once you have the Conquest mode in particular up and running, this is where the environmental hazards will really come into play, as you'll either jump into a system that you have no information about and discover an environmental hazard, or you'll go into a battle or lure an enemy into a place where your ship or your fleet design has the advantage over theirs. So again, the developers have a lot of options in how they implement this and can really go to town with the different effects and how those effects take effect onto the player that we may see. And so with all that said, these are the major updates that the development team want to achieve going forward. We may see further major updates being added to the roadmap at a later date as they start to tick off what is currently on screen. And likewise, we also don't know some of the smaller updates that they are working on behind the scenes that surprise the players fairly frequently, such as new maps, new game modes, and little quality of life enhancements that we've either requested within the Discord or that they've thought, hey, this is something really cool to add. So with that, keep paying attention to Nebulous Fleet Command. There is a lot on the horizon. With only 3 months out of early access, there is a long way to go and a lot of content to come. So I'm JD, thanks for listening and have a great day.